Let me introduce myself. Unlike the previous speakers on this particular stage, I'm not a political scientist. I'm a techie. And on Twitter, I'm Africa Techie. So I'm really a techie. And I'm not quite sure, and I think my talk will explain how I ended up from being a tech entrepreneur to a spokesperson for keeping on the internet in Africa. So my name is Rebecca Enonchong. I'm from Cameroon. I live in Douala, which is on the French-speaking side. And I am a technology entrepreneur. I started a company, a tech company in the US first in 1999. So I have almost 20 years of my company. And I opened an office in Cameroon in 2002. And have been living there pretty much steadily since 2004. And in the midst of my tech entrepreneurship, I decided to help support other tech entrepreneurs in Cameroon, given how difficult our environment is and how difficult it is for entrepreneurs to have viable businesses. So I was one of the co-founders of an organization called Active Spaces. So African Center for Technology, Innovation and Ventures is what it stands for. And we have several people from Active Spaces that are here this week in Accra. And we started that in 2010 in what we call Silicon Mountain, which is in Buoyed. And Buoyed has traditionally been the epicenter of the tech ecosystem in Cameroon. It just built organically as the place where tech happened. And Buoyed happens to be on the English-speaking side of Cameroon. So for those of you who may not know the history of Cameroon, so Cameroon has two, there's the French-speaking side, which is 80% of the population, and then the English-speaking side, which is about 20% of the population. And there used to be separate territories under the UN, and those two entities came together in 1961 in October. And the third entity, which is also English-speaking, joined Nigeria. So, but there are a lot of consequences to that, and there's been a movement for independence or secession for a very, very long time on the English-speaking side. But it is very petitions and meetings and nothing ever very vocal. But there's always been that movement in the country. And in 2016, the demonstrations, especially through the lawyers and the teachers, became much more active. So there were demonstrations, there was a lot of activity, and the government tried to suppress that activity. And in the midst of the suppression, they decided to shut down the internet. I mean, shut it down. It's not censor the internet. So it wasn't social media, it was the entire internet. They literally unplugged the internet. I'm not kidding. So the army, thinking that the internet on the English-speaking side, because there's an undersea cable that lands in Limbe, which is on the English-speaking side. So that undersea cable is 95% of all the internet capacity in the country. They went and literally sent army people and they just unplugged it, thinking that the English-speaking side wouldn't have internet. This is January 17th, 2017. And I just come in from an overseas trip. I'd landed in Douala, which is on the French-speaking side, and I couldn't understand why my internet wasn't working. I was like, I thought it was just a normal, one of those outages, like we have electricity outage here in Accra today. I just thought it was a normal outage, and then I started trying to contact a few friends. I had to use the actual telephone. And I tried calling people and nobody had the internet. So I was like, oh, the internet is out in Douala. Are you kidding? And then Yaoundé, the internet was out. The internet was out across the country for just a few hours. But those few hours were, for me, I almost had a heart attack. See, because I had banking transactions. You know, I had my apps on my phone and I had to do, and I couldn't do it. I actually literally had to use the phone, call overseas, and give my access, give my passwords for somebody to get into my bank application so I could do my transactions. So that was until midnight, until people from the telco came and plugged it back in. But then the government said, no, you can't plug it back in for everybody. So you have to disconnect the internet on the English-speaking side for 93 days. So here I was having a panic attack for 5 hours. Can you imagine not having internet for 93 days? That means no email, no banking at all. Banks had to close because they can't transact not knowing what your balance is. They need the internet. Hospitals that rely on e-health couldn't function. Imagine you registered for an online class, have paid for it, you can't log in. It was catastrophic. It was a real catastrophe. So you had now people like me. I'm a techie, I'm an entrepreneur, I'm not an activist. But all of a sudden, we had to become activists. And so the effect and the impact of the internet shutdown had the opposite effect from what it was intended to do. In other words, it was intended to shut down dissent. It was intended for those who had, were trying to get rights for the English-speaking side of Cameroon. It was intended to shut them down. Instead, they created a whole new generation of activists, of internet activists. So we started a movement within a few days called Bring Back Our Internet. So we started with this hashtag, and we understood something very early, is that our battle wasn't with our government, because our government never listened to us in the first place. So you can go and talk to the government and complain to the government all you want about your internet rights. They don't care. So our campaign was towards the outside world, towards the developed world, towards those that our government would listen to. The World Bank, the IMF, international media, international internet activists, all joined our campaign and to put pressure on the government to put it back on. But obviously, 93 days, the impact is huge, and we tried to explain this. It says, okay, you IMF, World Bank, you're giving money to the Cameroon government. But imagine investment is going to decline in the entire country. Because investors from the outside, they're not going to say, oh, Cameroon shut down the internet on the English-speaking side. They're going to say Cameroon shut down the internet. So even entrepreneurs that are on the French-speaking side are going to lose out on potential investment, potential customers. And we've seen the growth, the economic growth just being stifled completely. For the first time, our telcos are losing money. Right? This is the highest growth sector in African economies across African economies. Our telcos are losing money. That's a direct impact from that 2017 shutdown. And other effects are, so we had all these entrepreneurs, and as I said, Boya, Silicon Mountain is the epicenter of the tech ecosystem. Those entrepreneurs moved to, many of them moved to Douala, had to or to the French-speaking side in order to continue doing business. And we had what we called internet refugees, digital refugees, which were displaced people, displaced because of an internet outage. And so you can well imagine that, you know, as I often say, internet is our oxygen, right? It's the oxygen for our economy. Without the internet, we can't breathe, we can't function. And so when there is an outage, we had all these people moving, and we had to create what we called digital refugee camps. They were actual physical locations on the border between the English-speaking side. I know this is kind of funny, right? But the terms, but I wasn't that funny at the time, to be honest. So actually creating these, you know, renting these small buildings, homes, whatever, put in the internet so that people wouldn't have to do what they had been doing for weeks when the internet outage started, which is, so if you're on the English-speaking side with no internet, you create all your messages on your phone or on your computer, and then you give them to one person. You have to unlock your phone and, you know, no more password. And then one person would travel to the other side with a big bag full of phones, full of devices, go travel a couple hours to the French-speaking side and upload your messages, download the new information, and then get back to the English-speaking side without getting caught by the police, right? So that's how what had been happening, and it still happened during those 93 days, but having that refugee camp, the government never figured out until BBC showed it. they never knew about it until the BBC showed the camp. But yeah, so that you really find ways of connecting, because it's just the idea of not having any access to the internet in 2018 is unfathomable. Is that an English word? Sorry. So in addition to that, so as I said, all of a sudden, some of us became activists, right? So I became the de facto spokesperson for the Bring Back Our Internet movement. So here I am, a tech entrepreneur, and I've been calling it an activist all over the place. I'm like, no, I'm a geek, I'm a techie, I'm not an activist. But I think that's what happened, is that a whole new generation of people that are now activists, very active in the internet rights campaign, not just for Cameroon, but for other countries. Every time there's an outage, we can get together and mount a campaign to put pressure on those governments to turn the internet back on. And so a lot of entrepreneurs that were in the English-speaking side, and some entrepreneurs on the French-speaking side, regular Cameroonians that would never have gotten involved in politics at all of a sudden found a voice, and they was like, hey, wait a minute. So when we can speak out, we can organize. We can organize online. We can organize when we create a new community. My goodness, this is very powerful. So we're doing it for the internet, but it certainly can be done for other things. And it's we just had elections in Cameroon in October, and some of the same groups remained, but instead of talking about the internet, talking about the political situation and sending information and organizing through the same methods, through the same channels we had used for the Bring Back Our Internet campaign. And so I think that there are bad, of course, we don't want another internet shutdown, but I think that the message to African governments is it's going to have the opposite effect that you intend. Because in their minds, so many of these governments, they have no understanding of what the internet is. For them, internet equals social media. Social media equals revolution. So if you cut off the internet, you won't have a revolution, right? So in that, so trying to find ways of educating the government without communicating with them, since they don't listen to us, has been one of the outcomes of this campaign, of the Bring Back Our Internet campaign, and subsequently that hashtag has been used in other African countries when there has been an internet shutdown, of course with Keep It On, which is the traditional internet, the shutdown hashtag. So yeah, that's our little story, and our little experience in Cameroon. I'm not going to talk about the millions and millions of dollars that were lost, and how the economies suffered, and because it's really the story for me of entrepreneurs losing their livelihoods, right? Of losing their customers, their overseas customers, and there's no amount of money that can replace that, that can justify, that can explain that. And so yeah, I'd rather leave it in more open terms. So any questions?